Okay, time now to take a look at what's taking up pages in our international press. Diptyque Laurent is with me in studio. Diptyque, let's start with reactions really from the Korean papers to this news that North Korean President Kim Jong-Un said he would shut down the country's nuclear testing site. Well, if it works.
That's right. Well, after last week's historic summit with the South Korean leader Moon Jae-in and his appearance at the South Korean Winter Olympics and all these promises of meeting with Donald Trump, we're seeing a very different side to Kim Jong-un, a side that appears at least to be heading towards reconciliation. Kim Jong-un has now, as you said, promised to not just shut down his nuclear testing site, but invite South Korean and American experts and journalists to inspect the demolition. That's according to the Korea Jungang Daily. And in another sign of solidarity, the two Koreas will also unify their time zones, much to the satisfaction of the Korea Times, which is another Korean newspaper. Its editors say, so far, so good, and what's a pretty they're very approving of these attempts at rapprochement.
That time zone, I believe it's about a half an hour out, and it only came into play in 2015 or something very recent. So all of this move to make ties closer, it is getting a bit of a mixed bag of reactions, though, from some of their illustrators in the world press.
That's right. There has to be some kind of skepticism. There's always somebody who's thinking, well, it's not all is as it seems. The Independent's cartoonist Brian Adcock draws comparisons between this so-called merger between Kim and Moon, likening it to a recent merger between the supermarkets Sainsbury and Asda in the UK. If they can merge, what the hell, we can too. That's what they say in this cartoon. There is, of course, more reticence from Libération's cartoonist, the French left-leaning paper, Willem, in the paper today. He wonders if this more conciliatory side that we're seeing to Kim is really two sides of the same coin or two faces of the same man. And let's see if I can show you the cartoon, because I think you understand it better if I show you. So you have on one end Kim Méchant, which is mean Kim, and it's one of those things from when you were kids, you know, and the frown on the forehead, the wrinkle on the forehead becomes a frown when you turn it upside down. Anyhow, two sides of the same face, the nice Kim and the mean Kim. We're also seeing similar reticence from another cartoonist who wonders in this illustration if Donald Trump is getting played by North Korea. It's actually not, this is another cartoon, but there's one where you see Donald Trump and Kim playing chess together, and basically all the big pieces are on the side of Kim. So, you know, many people wondering if we're all just getting played.
Or if we will once again end up at stalemate, which is so often the case. Well, also making the news today, Diptyque, is British Home Secretary Amber Rudd, who quit after weeks of tension following this Windrush scandal.
Forced to quit, you might even say. That's what I've seen on one of the papers, forced to resign. It's making front pages all across the UK today. That decision came in late on Sunday. Home Secretary Amber Rudd is quitting her post. That's what the Eye, the Guardian and the Times all report. This over that Windrush scandal. That's the government's mistreatment of long-term UK residents who came to the UK as children of workers from the Caribbean, needed to boost labour in Britain post the Second World War. After growing up in the UK and really only ever knowing the UK as their home, they were unfairly, wrongly targeted as part of a government crackdown on illegal immigration.
Indeed, a lot of people saying they're not getting their right medical care, or having a lot of impact to that story on people living there. Meanwhile, there's a lot of speculation, of course, of what all this means for embattled Prime Minister Theresa May.
Well, there's a really interesting piece from The Guardian that sort of analyses, breaks this scandal down, saying that Amber Rudd only survived as long as she did for two reasons. One, that she's well liked in British political circles and was a fervent negotiator in how close Britain could remain to the EU post-Brexit. So we're seeing these sort of strategic political strategies. The other reason was that she was a, quote, lightning rod for public anger as stories of Windrush injustices were coming out daily. Essentially, she was Theresa May's human shield.
Okay, well, let's move back to here in France. And the papers here are focusing on this ongoing transport strikes ahead of Labor Day, or May 1st, tomorrow.
Not dead yet. That's a headline from Libération. That's what the unions are saying. They're clapping back at critics who say the month-long strikes are running out of steam. Now, ahead of Labor Day commemorations tomorrow, on Tuesday, the unions are combative, even if they're not really united. That's what Libération says. While La Croix, the Catholic paper, says it's the conflict that just keeps going around and round in circles. After 1 month of on-off strikes, there's still no result for unions, and public opinion is overwhelmingly against the movement. And indeed, this is something that's the focus of an article from the Daily Telegraph, which cites researchers saying, well, Macron's economic reforms might actually happen because after decades of strife, the French are finally falling out of love with strikes. In this article, the writer says many people are really questioning the fairness of these strikes. Industrial action back in the past was intended to support the voiceless and the oppressed, and now it's just being seen as a sort of stubborn means of resisting change. Okay, an interesting one to watch. Finally, Dipti, for this edition, there's a mini scandal in Saudi Arabia over the weekend involving female wrestlers. That's right. The World Wrestling Entertainment held a mega event in Jeddah over the weekend. It was billed as the greatest Royal Rumble, and the event itself might have seemed unfathomable just a few years ago. There were no female wrestlers in the lineup, but women were allowed to attend the event. The problem is that the promotional video featured, quote, scantily clad female wrestlers, forcing Saudi television to cut its broadcast at that point. But the leak has drawn criticism from the conservative circles in the country, highlighting the difficulties of opening up the kingdom to the West, but appeasing the more conservative elements at the same time. Okay, Deputy Garon, we're going to have to leave it at that for this particular press review, but thanks indeed.